we all know that speaking is the hardest skill in English to practice, but what is a good way to actually practice speaking in English? Even if you're on your own, there's no one around you to speak with, how are you supposed to practice? Well, today's special guest is here to answer that question. All right, mate, and welcome to the BritSpeakPod, the podcast designed to help you understand British life, British culture, and of course, British English. So let's get cracking. Hey up, mate. How's it going today? I'm not too bad. Thanks for asking. And welcome to episode 004 of the BritSpeakPod. If you're new around here, my name is Dan. Nice to meet you. Do me a favor, subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. I'd appreciate it. And if you're coming back, welcome back. It's nice to see you again. Today, we're talking all about speaking practice. Is there a good way to do it? Is there a bad way to do it? What is the benefit of doing it? And how can you do it even if you're on your own? In order to really get this point across, I've enlisted the help of a very, very special friend of mine, fantastic English teacher. And even though he's got a bit of a southern accent, he's a pretty nice guy. So I'd like to welcome onto the podcast today, it's StewSensei. Stu, how are you doing today, mate?
Hello, nice to see you, buddy. Yeah, really good, thanks.
Yeah, nice. So for the people that maybe haven't come into contact with you before, please introduce yourself a bit.
Hi guys, my name's StewSensei. I'm a British English teacher who lives in Japan. I've lived in Japan for 8 years, and I teach pronunciation and communication skills in terms of learning English.
Good stuff. And of course, you're pretty active over on Instagram and all that good stuff as well, right?
Yep, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, even Facebook. Anywhere you want, I'm there, StewSensei English, always the same name.
And of course, I'll put that in the show notes for anybody that wants to check you out. So today, Stu, I've brought you on as a special guest because we're going to be talking about speaking practice. It's a question that a lot of my students have. I'm sure a lot of your students have similar questions. But the first question I've got for you today is, why is speaking practice so hard for people?
It's a great question. And I think the real key answer to that is that most people don't know how to do it. They think speaking practice is speaking with someone. And whilst there are elements of that, of course, from the students that I've had, the many students I've had, especially ones in the UK, all of them can speak English. It's not actually speaking skills that's the problem. It's their confidence or what their image is of perfect speech, if you want to call it that. In reality, there is no perfect speech. There's just what you prefer, and there is the one that is successful when you communicate with people. So you can have, obviously, both of those can be the same thing, but the reason why I separate the two is because you could have the perfect Cockney accent, for example, which is an accent that's based in London, and it would be extremely successful there because everybody in the surrounding area would have heard multiple times or would have experienced listening to people with the Cockney accent and probably have a Cockney accent of some variety. But it wouldn't be successful if we went to Texas, for example. So in that situation, it's the perfect accent, but almost in the wrong location. So it's depends on the person you're speaking to, and that's how you need to adapt your speaking skills. So yeah, that's it.
That's really interesting. Like, I often feel that students come to me and they're striving for perfection, but perfection is not really a thing. And even if it is perfect, like I said, in London, it's not perfect in Texas or whatever. So my next question for you then is like, how do you get to the point where you can communicate confidently with people around you? Like, you've still got to practice speaking, right?
Yeah, it's again another great question. A lot of it is down to experience and where you experience success, and it's building up the success rate. Actually, is really the answer. Most learners, and what I come up against most of the time, as I had a student literally yesterday just start with me, and we had our first meeting, and they said that they couldn't speak English at all, but then continued to have a 30-minute lesson where they spoke for 80% of it. So it's clear that the idea of speaking is different in each person's minds. And it's nothing really to do with the speaking itself. It's just how you perceive your speaking in each situation. So I have another student who is going to be going on stage at a big event in Malaysia next year. And she said that she doesn't think she's going to be able to do it. But actually, we've already been through this process once before. It's just her feeling has changed, from the last time. So the first time we did it, she couldn't speak any English. And then she went on stage and did a 3-minute acceptance speech after we practiced for like 2 or 3 months. So, that it's just your opinion. And sometimes you forget about what a successful conversation looks like. And sometimes we look at accent and we think this guy speaks perfectly because I understand everything they say, but it doesn't mean everyone can understand what they say as well. So it's a kind of really interesting dynamic, I think, for learners who are trying to learn the language.
Totally agree. I think a lot of people come up with this idea that they can't speak English. They tell themselves they can't speak English because they don't sound like the people around them, right? Maybe they don't sound like people that they watch on YouTube, for example, whatever it is that they interact with. And they don't sound the same, so they feel, oh, I'm not as good as that person. Or I can't communicate in the same way that person can, which is, it's going to hold you back. But there is something to be said for communication does require some level of speaking ability. Most people possess it naturally, but there are some things that we need to practice to sound more natural, right? Whether it's intonation, word stress, even just individual sounds, sometimes we need to practice. Because, of course, if you look at Japanese, for example, they don't have the same sounds that we have in English. So some of those sounds are going to be very difficult. Now, a common example we have here in Japan is the difference between the word sit and the word shit, which for Japanese people is very much the same sound most of the time. So that can be confusing. So if a learner needs to practice these specific things, it can be really difficult for them to actually practice that stuff, right? Practicing speaking is really difficult, I think.
I think that it can be a lot more simpler than people think. And I think that's the thing. Almost the most obvious thing is the thing that we discount the most. So it could be like reading a book aloud, or it could be, repeating after someone whilst they're speaking, mimicking someone or shadowing someone. There's many ways to practice speaking. But I think another part of it is people just don't know how. We're teachers, so it's very easy for us to come up with things. But I think the average person just hasn't thought about it properly. They just think, I can't do it, and again, it comes back to confidence after that point. And that's a good example, what you mentioned about the sit and shit issue that Japanese speakers have, or light and right, again, another one in Japan. Most people say bitch and beach or stuff like this, yeah? So these issues actually don't affect, if we're talking about general speaking skills, they don't actually affect when you're communicating with someone, because people generally understand what you mean, even if there's a slight sound difference. The issue comes is when, a better example from Japanese is probably katakana English versus actual English pronunciation, and how different it is. And that's where communication skills can really fail, is when the pronunciation is so off. And in certain languages, you have to look at that. So like Italian, missing the H on the start of words. In Spanish-speaking countries, you'll find the Y and the J sound. They struggle with the J sound. And that may actually affect communication skills because it's absent. It's not like it's a similarity. So it's a bit more difficult in those situations. And people can do it. They just need to focus on, the first tip I can give people is that you need to actually find out what sounds are not being used in your native language. I think that should be a step that everyone can make. And it's not the written form that you're used to. It's a bit different. You have to learn about IPA, International Phonetical Alphabet, and learn what are the differences. You don't need to learn all the IPA, but you just need to learn the specific differences between your native language and English, or specific accent that you want to learn anyway.
I totally agree. Like, IPA and spelling are not the same. They're not even close. Like, the amount of people that are like, why is this word spelt this way? Like, I don't know, mate. It just is. And we say it this way. It don't match. That's English. Sorry,
It's not a phonetic language, so.
It certainly isn't. But I think it's quite interesting, something that you said about, sometimes your language doesn't have specific sounds. You need to go and work out which sounds are missing and practice those ones as like a step one, right? I think that's a great tip, and I'm sure anybody listening should go and do that. But I think there's something else for speaking that's quite different for learners. And that is you have to do it in real time, Like when you write something down, you've got time to think about it. You can research what's going on. You can double check yourself. But when you're speaking, it's all happening in real time.
Yeah.
And that's pretty overwhelming for a lot of people as well. You're spending all your time worrying about what the other person's saying. Am I understanding it correctly? Like, can they understand my answer? Am I using the right grammar? No. And all this stuff that gets like on top of people when they're trying to speak. So do you think this is also a side effect of not practicing speaking enough? Like if they practice speaking more, do these problems kind of disappear a little bit?
It definitely is a factor, of course. I think obviously the more that you speak, it's the same as any skill you have in life. I always give the example of when you do your first day at work, you don't know where anything is, and then you go in every day, and then eventually you begin to remember where the tools or implements are that you need, whether you're in an office or whether you're a carpenter or whatever. You find out where each thing is at the more times you're there. And it's the same thing with speaking. You begin to find similarities in your speech that maybe are slightly incorrect. But I think the key thing is most people don't know what the differences are, and they need to learn that. And it's a very key component. And once you're aware of what you're looking for, the other issue many students have is they try and fix everything in one go. It's better to have focused attack, I call it, so that you are then aware of it when you're speaking. Because when you're trying to fix everything, inevitably there's going to be things that slip through the net. But if you have a focused approach, let's take the J and Y sound from Spanish speakers, for example. So if you don't know that you're saying yam and yam when you meant to say yam and jam, two different sounds at the start of those two words, once you're aware of this one sound that you need to focus on, then you're more likely to pick up every time you make that error when you're speaking to someone. And then that way you can, like the very simple practice I give to my students is, for that one, is to think of the word jeans or think of the word jam. Something that it's got to be a word that is current in your everyday life that you would have learned the vocabulary for. So you're not necessarily thinking of the sound when you first learn the vocabulary, but you have mastered the sound, so you can do it. It's just because you've done that situation so much, or you've seen that thing so much, like jam. We see jam all the time. We see jeans all the time. You wear a pair of jeans. And then going back to that word and then thinking j before you say the word you wanted to say. So if you pick out the sound that you made a mistake with, for example, you say something like, I'm going on a journey today, instead of journey, and then you notice it, and then you go back and say jeans, I'm going to go on a journey today, and you can actually find the sound without even knowing the specifics. Some people get scared off with the technique training. You don't need to necessarily think like that because you've probably made the sound somewhere in your English journey already. So yeah.
I think so. I think one other thing that seems to happen for English learners is they don't really know how to identify the problem that they're having sometimes. I mean, if it's something obvious like a Y or a J sound, like if they want a glass of juice instead of juice, okay, you can probably hear that's a bit weird if you hear somebody else say it, right? But there's a lot of stuff, especially when you get into a little bit more advanced stuff in terms of like, where's the stress in the word? And, why is it a schwa sound? And why, these kind of more in-depth things that they don't really know what's wrong. So they try to fix it, even though they don't really understand the problem. And that can let people feel like, oh, this is useless. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, this is too hard for me. I don't get what's wrong. And I think that can also compound as well on top of this already feeling like I can't speak. And I also don't really understand what's wrong. And for a learner, that's frustrating, man. That will make you want to put your head in a bucket, I guess, for a while. I don't really know where that analogy came from, but, it's going to make you feel pretty bad.
And I think that it's not just that. It's also you hear so many people saying things in different ways. So you don't know what is the correct way. So we always go through some key steps when I first start with learners. What's your goal? Where are you living? Who are you using? English with? and then go from there, because you might not need a native speaking accent if you're not in a native speaking country. For example, if you're speaking with Brazilians in English when you're from Brazil originally, then actually a Brazilian accent probably helps communication. And if your goal is communication, which is different from having a hobby of learning an accent, then maybe accent is not the most necessary, but we can still tweak some sounds to make them sound clearer, but still have your Brazilian accent. So, it's that as well, I think. And people just don't know the journey. How do I get from A to B? I have this goal. I want to speak like a native, which is a vague goal anyway. And then I want to improve my speaking skills. Again, quite a vague goal, but it's a bit better than the first one. And then they need to pick a specific pronunciation style, in my opinion. And then if you pick British, and then what British accent do you prefer? Oh, I didn't know there's more than one. Okay, so you probably are looking at RP or a Southern English accent, I guess. And then let's start with that, and then let's start to work out what are different between your pronunciation style and the pronunciation style you want. And then maybe the learner says, well, actually, I like a Yorkshire accent. And then, okay, so then we can go from there, and then also look between, because it's the learner's, it's a passion thing, and changing pronunciation takes time, and consistent practice. And the first thing you got to do is work out what you want, and most people don't know that. And I think that's what muddies the waters a bit, Yeah.
It certainly does. Obviously, the correct answer for everybody is to learn the Yorkshire accent. Of course, that's the correct answer. But
I'm learning it.
Good lad. But it's one of them things. It's like, yeah, sure, you could learn a modern RP accent, right? But there's not going to be that many people on the streets of York that sound that way. So, it's all about location and goal in terms of what you're actually going to learn and what you're going to fix next, right?
100%. And just on that note, just to quickly mention, I have students in Liverpool where we learn about having clearer pronunciation, but the listening material I give them is from speakers with a Scouse accent, for example. So it's got to be predicated on what you need the language for. It's a very key thing, in my opinion. And then what you have to do is scale back everything so your goals are achievable. Because right now, I want to be like a native speaker is not an achievable goal because you have no road there. So you need to create achievable goals that map your journey. And for my student who lives in Liverpool, we need to obviously focus on speaking to people and improving communication skills. First step, I don't understand what people are saying. Let's practice the Scouse accent and what not the speaking side of it, but the listening side. Next point, what are the problems you're having? So one of my students is Ukrainian. So let's work on the W and V, the sound as well, and these things, and make it clearer. In Britain, we're not used to R sounds at the end. So that can also cause an issue. It doesn't cause a big problem, but it could do if you have a stronger R sounding accent like Eastern Europeans tend to have. So, working on pronunciation, then we're looking at reduction a little bit, or we're looking at implementing a new sound that they're not used to, and having these smaller things that actually map your journey, then thinking native speaker, there's so many of them and so many different styles, And then once you've done that, you can begin to find specific practice material. My first suggestion is work out what the sounds are different and then pick material that matches that. So you have let's just say Southern British accent. Sorry, Dan. Southern British accent or Estuary English accent is the one you prefer, yeah, or something like this. Let's say Southern British accent, yeah. So the first, or RP, everyone knows RP. So you pick RP, and then you're like, okay, so, and you can pick any accent, of course, but let's use RP as an example. And then what are the differences between my accent and RP? Oh, okay, so they don't pronounce the R's as strongly at the end of words. They make sure the T sound is there. I've actually picked up the D sound from American, for example, if you've been studying before. Oh, I picked up the D from American, but they put the T in water rather than water, so we're making some changes there. And then the key thing is finding material in the accent that you prefer. So if you're interested in RP, you're going to be finding actors maybe like Hugh Grant, like Keira Knightley, interviews that they're having, and getting because listening comes before input, becomes before output. Listening before speaking, and listen to them regularly, and then you're going to try and replicate them as you go forward. So you could do some shadowing. You could do some, you could have an audio book and then read the book out loud after the person. That's another form of shadowing, but I mean, it's just another way then, rather than just watching a video and trying to repeat after them. You know, things with a transcript, I think, are very keen, especially in the early stages, so you can see the difference, and then recording yourself whilst you're doing the process.
Yeah, I think that's important. Like, you mentioned shadowing there, and I think for me, shadowing is a technique that I often try and put onto people who are learning English, because it's pretty good technique that you can do even if you're on your own. Like, a lot of people say, oh, I can't practice speaking, I've got no one to speak with. Yeah, you can. There's the internet, there's shadowing, there's all these other techniques that you can use. So I always say shadowing's good. Reformulation is good, where you take a shadowing sentence and reformulate it in your own way, talk about your own experiences in a similar way, just to get used to practicing speaking, right? Just to get stuff out. Reading books out loud, like you said, is another really good technique that people can use. But shadowing, I think, is one that is really overlooked. Like, what are your thoughts on, like, shadowing as a technique for practicing speaking?
I'm a big fan of it, and the reason why is because, and I've actually made some material on it, because what I have found, I've taught for over 10 years English, and for different people in different places, and it always seems to have the same results with each person, because it doesn't matter where you're from. Once you understand the differences between the sounds in your language and the sounds of the accent you're trying to get, you then are able to map a journey, like I said before. And then with that, with shadowing, it's a practice that once you know what you're trying to achieve, anyone can do from any location. So I think it's so beneficial in that way. And also with English, there's so much material out there in general anyway for listening. So regardless of what accent you prefer, compared to other languages, if you're learning other languages, there's a lot of material. Now, what I used to do, and then what I then in turn created off of that, my students were like, I can't pronounce these words correctly. So I used to send voice notes to all my students when we picked up words in the lesson. And then I'd be like, oh, this is a consistent thing. So here's a bunch of words where you can see the difference, and you can go through and practice on your own. Because it's very key that students understand that the lesson is not enough in terms of, the lesson is just there to guide you, really, and get some in-person advice in the moment, and then create a plan for you. But the real key steps are taken outside the lesson and how you implement everything, because it's not a one and done thing. It's not like you when you go onto Udemy and you watch one course and it's like, I understand everything. Even in that situation, you don't pick up every piece of information, but some things you can learn in one bite. Whereas language is all about usage and how frequently you do it. And the key thing is it needs to be done outside the lesson. So I always gave them the material and then said, please try and practice. Even 5 minutes a day is better than 0. And then that's what we did together. That's what we did. And it ended up that I made a shadowing course based around British culture, because obviously I'm from Britain and people are interested in British culture. And then they can learn something about British culture and then also do shadowing daily as well. So, I think it's very, very useful.
And I agree with that. Like, I think shadowing is great, but I think if you can shadow something that you're actually interested in, from somebody who's speaking in a way that you want to be able to kind of emulate. So, like, if you want to learn estuary English and you want to learn about British culture, and you can do all of that at the same time in a way that's interesting to you, you're going to do it much more than just like, okay, I've got to read these words out today. I don't really fancy it. They don't really mean anything to me. It's not really related to my life. But I think if you can, and I think this is true for anything, like if you can tie something you're interested in to your language learning, it's going to go way better than if you're just reading a textbook, for example.
Yeah, 100% so. And it goes back to that people don't know how to practice. Like, I made the course for the fact that people don't know what to do in terms of practicing every day. So here's the material, I've given it to you, and here's the formula you need to do, and we break it down, go over individual words, and then put it into sentences, because I don't believe just practicing the sound is enough, in my opinion. You need to have it active. The sound you need to be actively aware of different sounds in different words. Or, for example, this is about difficult words more than specific sounds, but you need to be actively aware of the pronunciation of this word how it interacts with other words in a sentence, because your mind, when you're speaking, is not thinking about the way a word is pronounced, is thinking about what are we talking about in this conversation. So we put the word singular, we practice the word singularly, and then we put them into sentences and then into bigger paragraphs to really add more pressure on you to remember what the sound is meant to be. And that's just like Cristiano Ronaldo. He'll practice a skill multiple times in training, then he'll put it into a practice match with his team and maybe a small-sided game, which is like 5v5. And if you don't know about football, usually it's played 11 by 11 and you're not always active. But in 5v5 games in practice, you can be active quite frequently and practice the same skill multiple times. And then in a game, because he's practiced it and it's beginning to become more automatic, just like those sentences and the words individually, then when it gets put into the game, it will start popping up because he's adding pressure on slowly. You know, individual skill for focus practice, then slightly more pressure because there's more people around it, just like individual word. And then in a sentence, there's more words around it. And then into a paragraph, which makes it 10 times more difficult. You know, so the goal is to add pressure each time. And then the goal is to give you focus and then build your pronunciation from there.
And I think it's like any skill, like you said, like Ronaldo in practice or whatever. Well, I always say like pronunciation and stuff is like, it's a bit like going to the gym, right? You've got to put them reps in. It can't just be like, okay, I know how to pronounce this word, that's finished. You've got to produce it and you've got to keep repping it and, you know, doing your, obviously I don't know much about going to gym, but, you know, doing your bench presses or whatever. You've got to kind of do these things. And then eventually it becomes easy. It becomes automatic. You don't need to think about it. Driving is a great example. When you're learning to drive, it's proper stressful. But then when you've been driving for a while, you don't think about it at all. Your brain just takes over and you can just produce it, right? And that's what you want for your speaking practice. You want to do it over and over again to the point where you don't even think about it. It's just automatic. And I think shadowing is a great way of doing those reps, even if you've got nobody else to speak to be honest.
Well, that's another key thing, isn't it? And most people are worried that they can't practice their speaking skills because there's no one around you, or they're worried about speaking to people. So there's two kind of factors there. Shadowing gives you an opportunity to practice outside of conversation to build your confidence, and then also there's no excuse because there's practice material all the time. So it's up to you then at the end of the day. And if you really want to get to where you want to be with your pronunciation skills, it's down to you, and you have to take the responsibility for that. I know we're going a bit long, but I had a student, another student who wants to focus on improving their speaking skills. And I said, how much time do you have each week? And they said 2 hours. And then I said, when can you put those 2 hours? And they said, I can do all 2 hours on a Saturday. It's my only free day. And I was like, that's not going to help your speaking skills because with speaking skills, you're actually fighting against your native language as well. And people don't realize that. The more times you say a sound that isn't used in English in your native language, the more likely you will push that onto English, because it's how frequently you do something. And that's an obvious thing if you put it in any other setting, but I think we don't think about it in language. So I said to her, well, let me just let's just make a schedule together. Yeah. Let's see what you are currently doing and where you can actually fit in time. Because like I said, you only need to do 15 minutes. You're just reminding your brain, you're reminding your mouth what you need to do. And you're just going through it like that. And we worked out places. She gets stuck in a traffic jam every day for an hour. So I said, there's a great opportunity there where you could listen to the shadowing practice and just repeat after it and be practicing for 30 minutes. As a minimum. You don't even need to do the full 30. You could start off at 10 and then begin 2 weeks later, do 20 minutes. And then after that, do 30 minutes and make it regular, and every day you could do that because you're sitting in a traffic jam doing nothing, so there's an opportunity there. So when people think there's no time, there's always time. And the key goal is practice regularly if you want to improve your pronunciation. It's so important.
Totally agree. Like even 10 minutes a day, everybody's got to go to the toilet. Maybe you can utilize that time in it, like make double up on everything. 2 birds, 1 stone. That's what you've got to be thinking. You did mention a couple of times your shadowing material. So you made a bunch of shadowing material for people to like download, right? Tell us a bit.
Yeah, sure. So I've made a 31-day course, really, which could be replicated multiple times by people. There's enough material in there. There's over 190 videos. It's like a ridiculous amount of content available. 31 topics, and there's each topic has 3 paragraphs. So if you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced, it doesn't matter. There's a mixture of vocabulary. You could just do 1 paragraph a day. It's like break down the words from 1 paragraph, and then put them into sentences, then put them into the paragraph. And yeah, it's all there whenever you want to take it. So there's no excuse for no more material anymore. There's material available. I made it specifically because it worked well with my students. Over all the years, I've had thousands of students. It sounds ridiculous, but I have, because I've done so many students in different places and at different times and different ages. And it's always been a successful thing. Whether you're a kid and you want to help them practice the correct pronunciation of like you wouldn't allow a kid when they learn a new word to practice the wrong pronunciation. So you try to give them the correct pronunciation, and if they mispronounce it, you then help them. And that's a form of shadowing, a very small form, but it is a form of shadowing. And then it works up to adults, so it's available for anyone who wants it. It was made because it was successful in my classes, and I wanted to help as many people as possible, and it's, yeah, please use it if you get the chance to. If you really believe that you want to focus on pronunciation and speaking skills, it's something that definitely will help pronunciation, intonation, and fluency, 100%.
I mean, I've recommended it to a few of my students as well, because I've seen this course. I think it's pretty good as well. And there's going to be a link in the show notes for people if they want to check it out. But yeah, so 100%. Check out the shadowing course. There's loads of stuff. You can learn all about, King Charles, I should say, these days. I keep forgetting that he's not a prince anymore.
He's a king. He is a man now. He's not a boy.
He's evolved like he's a Pokemon.
He's evolved.
But wicked, Stu, thanks a lot. So just before we wrap up, have you got any last things you want to plug? Any other ways that people can find you? Anything you want to say to the audience?
I'm not too worried about finding me. You'll find me if you want to find me, and I mentioned at the start, StewSensei English, I'm everywhere. But the key thing is, if you're here, if you've got this far and your goal is to improve your speaking skills, there's no one else who's responsible for it but you. There's enough material. There's enough ways to do it. Don't wait for people to come to speak to you. You practice on your own. You begin the process now, and you'll find success a lot faster than waiting for the next step. You can do it 100%.
Wicked. Thanks, mate. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks a lot.
So, yeah, that was the lovely StewSensei, and he was there telling us all about the best ways to practice speaking, even if you're on your own, especially if you want to improve your communication skills. And if you're interested in the course, his shadowing course, 190 odd videos of shadowing material that you can use as much as you like and learn about British culture while you're doing it, you need to check out the link in the show notes, or you can go directly to BritSpeak.co/StewSensei-shadowing-course. Anyway, the link is in the show notes. I'm sure you'll find it. In the next episode of the BritSpeak podcast, we're talking about weird British idioms that all British people use that don't always make a lot of sense. So if you're trying to learn some more advanced vocabulary, the next episode is for you. It's coming next week, and I'd love to see you there. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcast from, or you can go to BritSpeak.co/podcast, and you'll be able to get all the latest episodes. Thanks for your time today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. See you there.